It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. No decision from Donald Trump on suspending military aid to Ukraine as the president renews his attack on Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
He thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
The president softens his anti-European rhetoric, calling its leaders good people, as Sir Keir Starmer says Mr. Trump is sincere about peace. As the war rages on, we speak to the Ukrainian drone unit that commanders say is striking at the heart of Russia's war machine.
Secret attacks like this are a key part of the war, with Ukraine sending drones armed with explosives to strike targets deep inside Russia.
Also on the programme tonight, prayers for the Pope after the Vatican reveals tonight he'd suffered 2 new episodes of what it called acute respiratory crises. Time to play chopsticks again as SpaceX prepares for its latest test launch. We'll bring you the build-up to that live. Plus,
I guess Americans are excited to see somebody finally stand up to a powerful Russian.
5-star, we look at the indie filmmaker who took the Oscars by storm last night. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello, good evening. The images of Donald Trump berating Volodymyr Zelenskyy in the Oval Office have resonated over the past 72 hours, creating a shockwave that has left the United States' European allies scrambling for a plan to protect both the security of Ukraine and themselves in a world where US support can no longer be taken for granted. Tonight, we heard from Mr. Trump in the flesh for the first time since that encounter. And while he resumed his attacks on the Ukrainian president, he said that he hadn't talked about suspending aid to Kyiv. And he had warm words, too, for those European allies, including the UK, who even earlier today had been another object of his anger. But no appearance by Mr. Trump passes without setting the scene for a new drama, with confirmation tonight that punitive tariffs on Canada and Mexico, along with China, will come into force tomorrow.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight? And should we expect those Chinese tariffs, the extra 10%, to take
No room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
Well, our US correspondent Mark Stone is in Washington. Mark, we will obviously talk about our top story, Ukraine, in a moment. But first of all, these tariffs are huge. So what is the impact, then, of that confirmation tonight that they will go ahead?
Yeah, hard to choose the top story, isn't it, sometimes, Anna? The tariffs, it's huge. It's a huge, huge situation for both Canada and for Mexico. 25% tariffs across the board for those two countries, the two biggest, the countries that do the most trade with the United States. This, you'll remember, was something that Donald Trump proposed a month ago. And back then, it feels like a long time ago now, both Canada and Mexico went into a state of genuine panic. They said they would try and do what Donald Trump wanted to prevent the tariffs from going into place. And so he said, OK, fine, I'll give you another month. This is all about fentanyl, that street drug coming into the United States, which does come in large quantities from Canada, from Mexico. It doesn't come in large quantities from Canada, but Donald Trump seems to think it does. And so back then, a month ago, the Mexicans said, well, put a whole load of troops on the border. Canada reiterated existing policies to try and counter the apparent movement of street drugs. That gave them a month. I think they thought maybe they'd got somewhere, but it seems tonight that they have not. And the effect for those economies, and indeed for the US economy, is likely to be huge indeed. And if you look at the stock markets tonight, well, the Dow Jones has fallen 1.5%, the S&P 500 1.8%, and the Nasdaq has plunged 2.6% as a consequence of these tariffs that that are due to come into place at midnight. So, you know, Donald Trump's a man who says he keeps an eye on the stock markets. He certainly goes on about them when they're going up. He says he ignores them when they're going down. He's not ignoring them. He will be looking at them. But it appears the case that as things stand tonight, and he says things move very fast, but as things stand tonight, he is due to put in place these whopping 25% tariffs, which will, as I say, have an extraordinary impact.
Yes, we'll certainly watch that very closely. But to Ukraine now, what is your assessment of where we're at? It seemed possibly tonight that even Mr. Trump isn't sure what his next move could be.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, we talk about things moving fast. I think it is true to say that they're moving so fast that anything could change at any point. I wonder whether tomorrow night is key, because he will address a joint session. In any other year, other than inauguration year, it's known as the State of the Union address in that building behind me, a moment where he will tout his successes over the past 40 days. And I think he expected that last Friday, would have gone well, that Zelenskyy would maybe, as some would see it, have capitulated, have signed that minerals deal, and that he could then tout in there the beginning of the peace process in Ukraine. Well, he can't, because instead he kicked Zelenskyy out of the Oval Office after that extraordinary day. But I think things might move quite quickly over the next, 36 hours or so. So perhaps something will change. I think in simple terms, you know, what Donald Trump wants is an apology from Zelenskyy. He believes that Zelenskyy behaved badly in the Oval Office. In a sense, maybe it's as simple as that. The question, though, is whether or not he will get that apology from Zelenskyy. Have a listen to what Donald Trump was saying in the White House an hour or so ago.
President Zelenskyy supposedly made a statement today in AP. I'm not a big fan of AP, so maybe it was an incorrect statement, but he said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time. And he better not be right about that. Well, I haven't even talked about that right now. I mean, right now, we'll see what happens. A lot of things are happening right now as we speak. I mean, literally as we speak. I could give you an answer and go back to my office. The beautiful Oval Office. I could go back into the Oval Office and find out that the answer is obsolete.
So, Anna, at the end there, Donald Trump was talking about whether or not he had decided whether to suspend military aid to Ukraine. I haven't even talked about that, he said. You can be sure he is talking about that right now, because he's meeting with his defense and security chiefs at the moment to discuss what next for Ukraine. Of course, that would be the so-called nuclear option if he was suddenly to suspend military aid to Ukraine. But you get the sense there that things are moving quite quickly. I think that the problem right now is a very personal one between Presidents Trump and Zelenskyy. If somehow they can find the space to at least be seen to make up, then that will, I think, create the space for potentially the signing of this minerals deal. And there's a suggestion from one lawmaker today who has spoken to Zelenskyy, a US lawmaker who's spoken to Zelensky's chief of staff, that the mineral deal signing, which is the outer contours of Donald Trump's peace plan, that could actually come, despite the fallout last Friday, that could come quite soon. So things moving very, very fast and hugely unpredictable, Anna.
Mark, as ever, we thank you live there for us in Washington. Thank you. Well, as Donald Trump continues his attacks on President Zelenskyy, Russia continues its fierce struggle with Ukraine for military superiority on the ground. Well, this is the current state of territorial control after 3 years of war, with Russia continuing to occupy large swathes of eastern Ukraine, including Crimea, occupied back in 2014. Well, over the last 2 days, there's been significant fighting, shown here with green circles, along the eastern front line between Russian-occupied Luhansk and Ukrainian-held territory in Kharkiv and Donetsk. Russian troops have continued offensive operations towards Kupiansk and Lyman, which remain under Ukrainian control. Russian forces also continued offensive operations in western Zaporizhzhia over the last 48 hours, but did not make any advances. And in the Kursk region of Russia, fighting has continued between Russian forces and Ukrainian troops attempting to defend advances won during the Ukrainian incursion last summer. Well, Sky News has been given rare access to a Ukrainian long-range drone strike as commanders say these attacks against weapon sites and ammunition depots are making it significantly harder for Moscow to conduct combat operations. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes then has this report.
Ukraine's secret weapon against Russia's war. Each drone is a one-way bomb that can fly hundreds of miles inside enemy territory. Sky News was given rare access to a launch, but was asked to blur sensitive details. Suddenly, there's an air raid alert. Shelter, he shouts.
There are air raid sirens going off right now. We've been told that this area where we are is a top target for Russia.
After the all clear, the mission is back on. They carefully prepare the first drone. The aircraft speeds into the darkness. The night sky, a helpful cover to avoid detection. Minutes later, another drone is ready to launch. We're told the target is a Russian ammunition depot. Top-secret attacks like this are a key part of the war, with Ukraine sending drones armed with explosives to strike targets deep inside Russia and Russian-occupied territory. This is machine warfare in action, an irreversible evolution that favours the innovators.
Every time we want to stop the war, but we want to win, of course, but we want to stop this disaster.
We've distorted the commander's voice to protect his identity. He says his drones have a success rate of 70 to 80%.
We change the war with these drones because we can show them that the war can come in their houses, in their towns, cities.
Ukraine has been developing drones for deep strikes since 2022 as a novel way to fight Russia's more powerful military. Production of unmanned aircraft like these has jumped from around 5 a month to over 500, with the monthly target this year set to expand to more than 2,000. The tempo of the strikes is also rising.
Russia is finding it increasingly difficult to conceal the extent of the damage.
At a secret location, we spoke to the officer coordinating the deep drone strikes by Defence Intelligence.
Headquarters have been hit, command structures weakened, and panic is spreading among their officers. Compared to a year ago, conducting full-scale combat operations has become significantly more challenging for them.
These men from Ukraine's military intelligence pilot one of the drones. They say careful planning is key to identify targets and know when to strike. We were asked to remove the sound here for security reasons. The aircraft takes off. About 10 are launched in total from this location alone. Ukraine is said to be leading the world with this kind of technology. A rare advantage it's keen to exploit. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Ukraine.
Well, back here, the Prime Minister updated a largely united House of Commons on a plan negotiated at the weekend with European allies to protect Ukrainian security, but warned MPs that the United States remains vital in securing peace in Europe. Some voiced their anger at how President Zelenskyy had been treated at the Oval Office, and there was the first sign of how the public feel about what happened, with 67% of Britons telling pollsters YouGov that Donald Trump was to blame for what had happened. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates.
Take that, give it a spin. Give it a spin, yes.
Keir Starmer is seizing the moment to become a major cog in global affairs. Here, hosting apprentices from the defence industry, hours after hosting a major summit of European leaders. International plaudits yesterday for placing Britain at the forefront of the coalition aiming to secure peace in Ukraine.
And now we're going to give you a lot more work.
Yes.
I call the Prime Minister.
Today, his focus improving his standing at home.
Less than a week since I called on this House to show the courage of our predecessors, we see clearly before us the test of our times. a crossroads in our history.
As he spoke, President Trump was launching another tirade against President Zelenskyy, the Prime Minister walking a difficult tightrope.
I also welcome the President's continued commitment to that peace, which nobody in this House should doubt for a second is sincere.
The peace plan will likely mean British boots on the ground in Ukraine. For the Prime Minister, it's a necessary show of strength.
So a strong peace, a just peace, a lasting peace, that has now to be our goal. It is vital, it is in our interests, and its pursuit, Britain will lead from the front. We must now win the peace.
Can we bedrock?
Agreement across the chamber.
There are, of course, many areas where the Prime Minister and I disagree, but now is the time for us to discuss where we do agree. At times like these, it is so important that we stand together to defend shared values and the fundamental, basic principle that aggressors should not win.
There were occasional criticisms, some on his own side not happy about cutting foreign aid to fund defence spending.
Does the Prime Minister understand the concern of so many that these cuts could, in fact, in the long term, hobble the very leadership that the Prime Minister has shown this weekend?
The PM's new man in Washington already under fire too for suggesting Ukraine lays down its arms at once.
Mr. Speaker, many of us were confused by Lord Mandelson's comments yesterday. So can the Prime Minister confirm that they do not represent government policy?
The Prime Minister swerved the challenges and was mostly able to enjoy that rare common scene, unity.
I find myself in the strange and rather uncomfortable position of very much agreeing with the Prime Minister on everything he has said. I think this weekend he has not really put a foot wrong.
It's been good to have him agreeing with me. We should do this more often.
The Commons united behind the Prime Minister today, just as problems started to emerge. Keir Starmer told MPs that he needs more from the US to guarantee Ukraine's security than a minerals deal alone. Meanwhile, President Trump launched a blistering attack against President Zelenskyy. He's leading the European response, but it feels like a race against time before the White House could pull the plug. President Trump's closest ally in Parliament thinks Friday's White House row actually leaves peace closer than ever.
Zelenskyy needed to wake up and smell the coffee. And since that meeting, he's done so. But the upshot of it is the minerals agreement will be signed within the next week or 2 weeks. And that'll be the first step towards a ceasefire and a peace agreement.
A ceasefire within days has been floated by the French. Pressure is mounting from America. Can the Prime Minister keep everyone on board? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, the Prime Minister is banking on what he's called a coalition of the willing to bolster Ukraine's security after any ceasefire. But who might be involved and what capabilities would any coalition have? Here's Sky security and defence analyst Michael Clark.
We've now seen the start of a European plan for peace in Ukraine. The Prime Minister laid out a 4-point plan focusing on military aid, Ukrainian sovereignty and economic pressure on Russia, but also what Sir Keir called a coalition of the willing, countries that would work with Ukraine on a peace deal and potentially be part of some sort of peacekeeping force. Now, here are some of the European NATO leaders at the weekend. It's all happy families, but how many of this group are actually willing? Well, the makeup of the coalition is something that Keir Starmer is keeping fairly quiet about because it's an evolving initiative. It definitely includes the United Kingdom and France because it's their idea, and it likely also includes Italy and Canada and maybe the Netherlands and perhaps the small Baltic states. But beyond that, it's pretty uncertain. Spain has ruled out participation. Germany cannot agree to such a commitment when it's in between chancellors. Poland has a pretty big army, but is clearly nervous that if it deploys a proportion of its forces to Ukraine, it'll be short of troops to declare any future Russian aggression attack elsewhere in the north. So the UK will be a key participant. But of its available forces, there would likely be only about, say, 5,000 on the ground at any one time. And there needs to be 3 times as many troops to be available for whatever number is deployed. So, depending on the involvement, the RAF could play a part. Britain's Typhoons and F-35 fighter jets will be a real asset. But there are only a handful of squadrons of each of those, and they'd be working very, very hard. Now, France has more than 110,000 troops, but again, nowhere near that number would be deployed, and they still need 3 times as many as however many they have on the ground. France also has Rafale and Mirage jets. They're very good, but not enough squadrons to do a major, enduring enforcement operation. And the rest of NATO pales in comparison to US military capability. And without the US, Russia may challenge European-only forces and increase the likelihood that they'd either have to fight or withdraw. And what about NATO's famous Article 5? Now, this is the popular understanding that an attack on one is an attack on all. Now, it won't be much help in forces operating outside the NATO area, and even inside the NATO area. Article 5 seems to have become somewhat conditional. Ultimately, this initiative is designed to show the US that Ukraine has to be part of any Trump-Putin negotiation and that the Europeans will have something to offer in making it work. And it shows Russia that the Europeans have something to offer Ukraine if it simply decides to fight on. The question is whether they are brave enough to dare Russia to take them on militarily if the US is not backing them up, and whether the Russians will be confident enough to try.
Professor Clark there. We have had an update this evening on the health of Pope Francis. Prayers have been said tonight in the Vatican City for the Pope after he suffered what Vatican sources say has been another hard day. He has had 2 episodes of acute respiratory failure and is now back on mechanical ventilation. The 88-year-old has been in hospital with double pneumonia for more than 2 weeks now. Nearly 600 migrants crossed the English Channel in small boats yesterday, the highest number for a single day so far this year. The Home Office said a surge in arrivals was to be expected following a fortnight of cold and windy weather, but promised to double down on the strategy of smashing the smuggling gangs. Police have confirmed the remains of a skeleton found in Stoke-on-Trent are human. They were found yesterday by a member of the public on land near Festival Park. Officials are attempting to identify the remains and are appealing for more information. 2 people have died after a car rammed into crowds in the German city of Mannheim, the latest in a series of similar incidents in the country. Several people were seriously injured, and police say they've arrested a 40-year-old German man believed to be a suspect. An official said that there was no indications that he had an extremist or religious background. Our international correspondent, Alex Rossi, has this report and a warning his report contains images that some may find distressing.
The city centre in Mannheim was shut down after the incident and residents were warned to stay away. A major operation is still underway as police contain the area and first responders deal with the injured. The streets here were full of people when this car was driven into the crowds. It was lunchtime and this is carnival season in Germany. The Interior Minister says preliminary investigations indicate the suspect, who's been arrested, is a 40-year-old German from Rhineland-Palatinate, and there's no evidence to suggest the incident is related to the carnival.
As far as the specific motivation of the crime is concerned, we have no indication of an extremist or religious background at the moment. The motivation could rather be based in the person of the perpetrator himself, but that is the subject of an ongoing investigation.
German police have been on high alert. Social media accounts linked to the Islamic State have been calling for attacks on carnival events in other cities, specifically Cologne and Nuremberg. Germany has also suffered a number of terror attacks in recent months, with the perpetrators using vehicles as weapons against groups of people. In February, here in Munich, an Afghan man drove a car into a group of demonstrators, leaving 2 dead. And just before Christmas, 6 people were killed in this horrific attack at a market in Magdeburg. The investigation is continuing into this latest incident, but what happened here will increase tensions and security concerns in a nation which is already reeling from a surge of terror attacks. Alex Rossi, Sky News.
SpaceX is due to launch its mammoth Starship spacecraft tonight, its 8th test flight. Last time in January, the booster rocket was successfully recaptured by the so-called chopsticks on the launch pad, but the spaceship itself disintegrated during the flight. But let's find out more. Our correspondent Emma Birchley joins me in the studio. This is Elon Musk in his day job, of course, isn't it? What is the point of tonight's launch then?
Each time they do these test flights, they are learning. Even when they make mistakes, it would appear, you hear them all cheering. The SpaceX mantra is fail fast, learn faster. So this is the 8th test flight, 11:30 our time, 5:30 local time in southern Texas, Cameron County. It's the biggest, most powerful rocket that's ever been made. It's 123 metres long, 400 feet. It's an absolute whopper. Now, if it all goes to plan, what happens is it lifts off, and then the booster, which is called Super Heavy, breaks away, and the engines reignite to slow it down. It comes back to the tower from which it lifted off. And in theory, these chopsticks, as they call them, these giant robotic arms, catch it. So this would be the 3rd time, if it goes to plan, that it would have done out of the eight test flights we've had. And then the upper stage will carry on its flight. And the plan this time is to deploy 4 dummy Starlink satellites. They tried to do that last time. It obviously all disintegrated. So, in theory, 66 minutes later, it splashes down into the Indian Ocean. Now, last time we know it disintegrated back in November. I don't know if you remember, Donald Trump was there alongside Elon Musk. It was the big moment to watch the chopsticks in action, and it didn't quite go to plan. There had to be this great big splashdown of the booster. So they'll be hoping today they can have success on both, and it's important just to give you context briefly of what this is all about. Ultimately, SpaceX says on their website that it's about providing a service to Earth orbit, Moon, Mars and beyond. They're not holding back on that, are they? And NASA actually have already signed up a modified version of this Starship to, in theory, be the lunar lander for a mission to the moon, so with people on board in 2027, so we're not far off.
Well, even without the beyond, it is a dramatic takeoff, isn't it?
Very
I know you're
dramatic.
coming back for that.
Yeah.
Emma, see you later. Thank you. Now, he was the unlikely star of last night's Oscar ceremony. Sean Baker didn't have a big budget or any big-name actors, but his film, Honora, was the standout success, winning 5 awards, including 4 for him personally, equalling a record set by Walt Disney. The subject of his film, though, very far away from the world of Disney, telling the story of a stripper who marries the son of a Russian oligarch. Our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer, reports now from Los Angeles.
15 cash up front.
It's a film which brings home the economic inequalities of a Brooklyn sex worker who falls for the son of a Russian oligarch. 25-year-old Mikey Madison's Oscar win remarkable for a relative unknown.
This is a dream come true. I'm probably going to wake up tomorrow.
Honora. Best Picture winner Honora's 5 Oscar wins, a Cinderella story in itself. Filmmaker Sean Baker making history as the only individual ever to win for writing, producing, directing and editing his own film.
I saved this film in the edit, trust me. That director should never work again.
At the after-parties, the stars letting their efforts speak for themselves.
Mikey, just a word on how it feels to win.
The champagne flowing at Vanity Fair after a mini-earthquake earlier in the night.
Naming no names, there'll be a fair few here waking up to hangovers. And really, it's hard to say whether it was the champagne making people wobbly, whether the earth actually moved, or if it was Honora's run of wins jolting a few of those studio executives upright.
While host Conan O'Brien might have made light of the film's achievements,
I guess Americans are excited to see somebody finally stand up to a powerful Russian.
its success prompting conversations about whether new government tax incentives coming in April might help the UK to create more films like this.
In the UK, there's only 9% of UK films shown in the cinemas. And the cinemas in the UK, we've seen, have been really struggling. We need to support the sector as well to get audiences to go to those cinemas, for those cinemas to show indie films. Because we may be making more films because of the tax credit, but those films still need to be seen.
The runaway success of a film that only cost $6 million to make, peanuts to Hollywood. Proof in the city where money talks of how a little really can go a long way. Katie Spencer, Sky News in Los Angeles.
Now, one of Britain's most famous and best-selling artists has died at the age of 73. Jack Vetriano became a painter after being gifted a watercolour set by a former girlfriend. The rest, as they say, is history. His 1992 work, The Singing Butler, was a resounding success, becoming a bestseller and later fetched more than £700,000 at auction, a Scottish record at the time. A reinterpretation of the work by street artist Banksy is expected to sell at a London auction later on this week. Estimates suggest it could be worth £5 million. Well, Mr. Vetriano was found dead at his apartment in Nice, in the south of France, on Saturday. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the political journalist Zoe Grunewald and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Lovely to see both of you. So much to discuss, including this on the front page of The Telegraph. Its headline for tomorrow's newspapers, Trump to Zelenskyy. We'll be right back with more on that. Your time's almost up, the paper says.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the political journalist Zoe Grunwald and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Welcome and lovely to see both of you. So, as ever, let us check out the front pages. Trump to Zelenskyy, your time's almost up. That's the front page of the Telegraph, leading with Donald Trump's latest warning to Ukraine's president to get on board for a peace deal or else. Let's take a look at the Daily Mail. Trump, I won't put up with Zelenskyy for much longer. According to The Guardian, the rift between the US and Ukraine is growing wider than ever. The Times reports on Trump's remarks earlier, criticising Europe for showing what he called weakness over the issue. The Eye reports that Britain is approaching Middle East countries, joining any peacekeeping mission in Ukraine once a deal with Russia is agreed. The Financial Times says Europe's biggest powers are supporting moves to use more than 200 billion euros of frozen Russian assets to help support any ceasefire. While the Daily Express quotes Sir Keir Starmer saying the UK must lead from the front to stop what it calls the Russia menace. The UK Information Commissioner's investigation into how social media platform TikTok uses children's data and separate allegations that it's made money from streaming underage pornography is the top story for the Metro. While the Star tells us about chatbots, which apparently will soon be doing so much of our day-to-day work for us that we'll have to be paid to do nothing. Won't do this. It's going to be fine. Zoe and Salma here. We live in extraordinary times. The headlines, has to be said, on the Trump-Zelenskyy relationship is somewhat depressing. But Donald Trump has subsequently spoken, and I suppose the heartening bit of news is that he had not considered yet pulling current aid to Ukraine and praised European leaders as good people. Most of them are my friends. So, you know, it's minute by minute, isn't it, in Trump world?
Well, I think this speaks to what we've always talked about in relation to Trump, which is that he can be incredibly erratic. And I think that this is a real example of that. Although it does feel a little bit like we're getting to a little, perhaps some brinkmanship, because you've got Zelenskyy on one hand saying that we're very, very far away from a peace deal. Trump then coming in and saying, you know, is this man even interested in peace? Some people, you know, some of my old colleagues in Washington have said that perhaps this is a way, if you were being generous to Trump, this is a way to get Russia around the table. Might not be any other way of doing it. But I think a lot of people, particularly in Europe, are incredibly horrified at the way that this has gone down, and this kind of constant criticism of what used to be a Ukraine ally in the US, I think is still going to be troubling a lot of European leaders.
And the point that Trump seems to be trying to make now with regard to Zelenskyy is that he is the impediment to peace, effectively. The quote in the Daily Telegraph here, if somebody doesn't want to make a deal, I think that person won't be around very long. That person will not be listened to very long because I believe that Russia wants to make a deal. So if he's being billed now as the impediment, what happens to Zelenskyy? And does that make it harder for the relationship, which faltered so terribly, as we saw on Friday, to be rebuilt?
I think it's absolutely right that the comments we've seen from Trump and the way that Trump has handled much of this this kind of ceasefire deal and this attempt at peace points to him being erratic. But I also think it points to his need for control. And I think we saw how the conversation went down in the White House between Zelenskyy and J.D. Vance and Trump on Friday was a real indication of how quickly things can disintegrate if Trump feels that somebody is trying to take control of the situation. You know, he really didn't like Zelensky's comments. And, you know, there is also this real question about Trump's relationship with Russia. You know, is he really trying in good faith to do a deal between Russia and Ukraine, or is he in Russia's pocket? And I think it very much feels like at the moment that he is doing much more appeasement towards Russia than he is Ukraine. And that is a massive concern for European leaders, because although, you know, there is that more generous interpretation that that is a way of getting Putin round the table, that is a way of building relations with Putin so that they can proceed to a ceasefire, there is a worry that that will empower Putin. And even if a ceasefire is agreed, he may well come back for more.
Well, he was asked that specifically, was he not? That question, not in these words, are you a Russian apologist, effectively? And he said, look what happened under George Bush. You know, they tried to take Georgia. Look what happened under Obama. Crimea was taken. Look what happened under Joe Biden. Russia tried to take the lot. Under me, that didn't happen. So that's become his argument with that accusation.
Yeah, there are some people, I mean, even in the coverage that we'll see in tomorrow's papers, there is that idea that, you know, even Putin might be slightly getting worried about Trump's becoming erratic. But there is a point that is actually made in the front page of The Telegraph, which is about the Institute of the Study of War, a US think tank, that's saying that any kind of breach or any kind of difficulty that you see with the Allies' relationship, Putin is only going to be grateful for that. So I think this idea of kind of the West pulling away from each other in their traditional alliances, it's all grist to the mill for Russia. That's not to say that there aren't people in the US that support Trump's point of view. And as you say, this is not something that has just happened in the last few years. This is a long time coming. The Russians would argue this about NATO's creep around Russia. So it's actually a lot more complicated than we think, but there is a binary thing here in that we cannot appease an aggressor.
And the fracturing of the West is exactly what Putin had been hoping for. That's what the bot farms are out to do, aren't they? There's The Guardian. US rift with Ukraine grows as Europe seeks a ceasefire. Clearly, Volodymyr Zelenskyy is nervous about a ceasefire. He signed up to agreements in the past, which is the point he was trying to make to Trump and Vance on Friday. And we saw what happened with that invasion in February 2022. The Eye, meanwhile, suggesting that the UK is hunting new allies to keep Putin at bay. You know, this is about spheres of influence, isn't it? And keeping this coalition of the willing, which included Canada, it seems, at the weekend, together.
Yeah, so there's a suggestion in here that Britain will look beyond the traditional kind of Western NATO allies to try and look at how they might grapple with the powers needed to enforce a Ukraine ceasefire. And the suggestion is this could go as far as the Middle East, Jordan, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. My understanding is these particular countries haven't been confirmed by Number 10, but this is the suggestion that these are the kind of places they might look at, because there are those relationships already built there, both between the UK and these countries and also between Russia and these countries, and that might be the way to get Putin round the table, you know, approaching a ceasefire. But of course, those countries don't come without their own issues and their own, you know, there are obviously human rights concerns in these countries. There's all sorts of issues about the money and the sphere of power and how the governments work in those countries as well, which I think will worry some politicians here in the UK. But it is absolutely the case that if the UK doesn't feel like they can rely on the US, it makes sense that they would look to bolster that ceasefire with other countries away from the West.
And that's where the pulling of overseas aid has such an impact on the idea of soft power and influence. US aid being pulled, UK aid now being pulled too because of the need to spend more on defence. I mean, these things don't happen overnight, but people remember, don't they?
Oh, no, indeed. And also there is this idea of kind of the soft power that we've been so proud of for the last decade. I mean, I remember being on trade missions to China, selling Wallace and Gromit, you know, and the idea of kind of like English culture and English media, you know, being out there and really taken by, not so much India, but certainly the Chinese, and that being our way into the new world. And we are drifting back into hard power. So the idea that aid is going to be spent on military defences is certainly a ginormous shift. The thing that's interesting about this front page, though, and as Zoe says, we need to understand whether it's going to be confirmed, is when there is regional conflict already with Israel and Gaza, why would a country like Saudi Arabia or Jordan move their resources to focus on something that's happening in Europe? So I really would like to understand the details of this. Is it because we are now recognising bigger power that's taking place in Saudi with more capital, more energy, a younger population that exists out there in the East, and asking them to play a bigger role? Is this Western countries asking them to contribute troops in a peacekeeping mission. I think it would be very interesting to see the detail of this, because this is a real huge shift in what we've understood as the dominant world order thus far.
Yes, and one line there, inside the paper, even Putin is unnerved by Trump's erratic, thuggish approach. So there we are, we live in hope, I guess, don't we? But, you know, the point being made by some that we're seeing spheres of influence fracture and then reform in different shapes. You'll have the European sphere, you know, the North American sphere, minus Canada by the sound of it, obviously with tariffs coming up at midnight US time, and then the China sphere over Asia. So we're starting to see a realignment of the world order, which is truly dramatic, which is what many people thought when they were watching those 10 minutes of horror in the Oval Office last week. In the meantime, should we go to the Financial Times as well? Europeans move towards seizing the 200 billion euros worth of frozen Russian assets. I think they've been spending the interest on this, haven't they? But, you know, what to do with this frozen assets and what the city and other financial institutions would feel if those were then taken and spent, whether that, you know, ruins reputational trust, I don't know. But it's interesting nonetheless.
It is, because it's a sort of new, you know, it goes back to that thing you were saying about the new world order and the new spheres of influence. You know, this is a suggestion, and there is a... So you're absolutely right that the current frozen assets, the profits and the proceeds have been used, but the assets themselves are more complicated. It's not straightforward. You can't just... You know, it might be that it sets a whole new legal precedent. It might be in contravention of international law. There's also concerns about what it might do to the euro, what it might do to international markets. But there is this real movement towards, actually, could this be the key to making sure that Russia does adhere to a ceasefire? You know, if it feels that that money can be taken and used to...
Oh, you mean just as a threat, not actually to fund military?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is... But it's something that would be unprecedented and that we haven't really seen before. And I think, especially for Keir Starmer talking about it, you know, I think he understands that there is a kind of a moral feeling that this might be the right thing to do. But, you know, he is a former human rights lawyer, so he's going to obviously be concerned about, is this going to break international law? Is this something we want to proceed with?
Very, very quick thought on that, then?
Well, I think it's within reason to be able to discuss how you might use this frozen assets, but there are really serious implications about foreign wealth being able to be retrieved from safe havens and banks in Europe.
Yeah, it's something that seems like a very simple answer, but is actually a very big deal, isn't it, really? Yeah. Lots more still to come in the next part of our programme, including an investigation into disturbing allegations about the use of TikTok, or misuse, rather, of children's data, and worse. Back in a moment.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the nets?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing.
A towering monument to the China dream and its demise.
From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart.
China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world.
Mass protests forced the president to flee.
The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor.
Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child.
The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank.
These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them. A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide.
Sydney's floodplains underwater again. This is the third or fourth time in 18 months that their homes have gone under. Sky News, the full story first. It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering designed to humour and to help us.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Zoe Grunewald and Salma Shah. Welcome back to both of you. Zoe, why don't you take us to the Metro? This is a probe, a child sex probe into TikTok and its use or misuse. Tell us more.
Yeah, so there's a suggestion that, well, there's two suggestions here. The first is how children's data is being used or misused by TikTok, but the other is this separate probe that has revealed that TikTok is earning money by live streaming performances by young girls. And these are kind of sexual performances where it sounds like men are giving them gifts and on TikTok, and therefore TikTok is collecting the proceeds. So there's just lots of questions about whether TikTok is doing its due diligence protecting young people. We know that TikTok is a platform that mostly caters to young people, to children, and it sounds like they don't have the protections in place. So they talk about one 17-year-old girl in Kenya who talked about selling herself on TikTok, dancing naked. She said she was just 15 when a friend showed her how to bypass the restrictions on the site. So clearly, these social media companies are not doing what many politicians hope they would just do from an ethical or moral perspective, which was just put in protections in place to keep children safe, if they're financing, if they are able to make a profit from it.
Yes, indeed. And you have related that to the picture of Melania Trump on the front page of The Telegraph, who has chosen what as her focus?
Revenge porn and deep fakes. And I seem to recall that, you know, there were pictures of Melania Trump that were circulated around the internet the first time her husband was president. And so she's taken this up, as First Ladies often do, take up campaigns. And it's interesting that actually that theme of internet safety, internet protection, not only is going through the legislative tracks like the TikTok data crackdown, but also something that people want to bring a lot of awareness to. And I think that as we progress with various forms of technology, particularly generative AI that produces these deep fakes, I think this is going to become a bigger issue. So interesting that she's opted for that, and interesting that she's opted for that as her husband's being supported by many tech billionaires, as it seems.
Yes, indeed. Keep them all in check. There we are. Good luck with that one. In the meantime, down the bottom of the Daily Telegraph, we've just got a couple of minutes left. So 3 out of 4 people will be overweight or obese by 2050.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's a suggestion that obesity is going to rise across the world, but particularly in the UK by 2050, it'll be 3 in 4 adults. And obviously this really throws into perspective the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting's plans. He's talked a lot about the cost of obesity on the NHS. He says it's about 6.5 billion per year, and it's the second biggest preventable cause of cancer. So I think this is really going to be top of the Health Secretary's agenda. You know, how will he encourage people to take control of their health and bring those obesity rates down, because otherwise we're going to see further strain on our health service.
I'm going to move on, unless you've got which is to the Daily Star. Already we saw the music industry really concerned about AI. So far it seems that our creative industries are being taken over by AI and we're left to do the cleaning. But anyway, they say this is the rise of the robo-lackeys, as they put it.
Yes, but It seems like we're going to have to be paid to do nothing whilst the robo-lackeys take over. And so there's an idea of something called a universal basic income.
That's right. It's been around for a while.
That's going to take hold. Well, I'm not sure I really like the idea of this. Perhaps we'll all have to become Luddites and stop the advance of AI and robots and anything else.
Smash them out,
yes. Exactly.
The one-day working week has been a thing for a while, though, hasn't it? And I think, you know...
it's probably why our tax receipts are in such a terrible state at the moment. I don't think we need robots for people to do one-day working weeks, I'm afraid.
Both of you. On that note, it's time to say thank you for the moment, anyway. Zoe, Salma, see you shortly. Thank you very much indeed. Let's see what the weather's doing. It's been nice so far, hasn't it? And the next few days...
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Yes, the next few days will be largely dry and settled, although the northwest will be wet and windy at times. Tomorrow will be mostly fine at first, but southern Britain will see an extensive frost and some patchy fog, especially over parts of Wales and the southeast. Scotland will be cloudier and milder with patchy drizzle in the northwest. The morning will be dry and sunny for most, with cloud over Scotland tending to break and early fog gradually lifting. Northwest Scotland, though, will remain dull and damp. Temperatures, much like today's, windy in the northwest with coastal gales. Northwestern parts of both Britain and Ireland will see patchy drizzle, giving way to more general rain during the afternoon. Most other places, though, fine into the evening, but the wind will pick up in many northern and western areas. Wednesday, dry and sunny in the south, while Scotland, Northern Ireland and the northwest of Ireland will be mostly cloudy and windy with outbreaks of rain, and it will be warmer for many of us.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.